All right. Well, I might just begin, and then if anybody joins in, they can join in. But I want to start out with that what we're going to be start talking about now is the symbolic life and the difference between the symbolic life and the conscious attitude. Because the things I run into is that people don't realize that this thing we call Jungian psychology is really a very ancient wisdom. And the ancient wisdom has to do with becoming aware of the consciousness within us and nothing else. I mean, this is the whole idea, is to become aware of the inner consciousness. And Jung kind of describes it as this kind of, let's see here. Okay. Hi, Tim. How are you? Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, anyway, this is the hi, Tim. Jung says that our way has to be one where the creative character is present, where there is. Just a second. We'll open up this. There we go. Hi, Mara. How are you?
Oh, fine.
We're just starting here.
Okay.
I was just mentioning that we're kind of do a shift in start over, just because I just find that people that we need to identify the difference between the symbolic attitude and the creative attitude, because it doesn't do any good to read Jung if you're reading it as someone who thinks it all is all about personalistic problems or psychology, because it's related instead to what I was just telling Nicholas, is the house of wisdom is built on a rock, and where is that rock? It's rock bottom. It means you can't go any lower. So it tends that people can't start the symbolic life until they have some great crisis in their life. Now, this is not always, but it's a great crisis starts in their life, and they don't know anywhere to turn, so they've hit rock bottom. And Jung used to say that to be fully human, you must have the ability to touch the bottom, where you can't go any lower. And this is where Inanna goes when she goes through her 7 gates. Through every one of the 7 gates that she goes down until she gets to the rock, she has taken off part of what Nicholas and I were just discussing a second ago, the persona. She's removing her persona. And when she gets down to the 7th gate, all of her possessions, all of her whatever, she's now is down there with what in Zen they say, show me the face that you had before you were born. She's now there with her face that she had born. But now the house of wisdom is built on this rock. So this is where you start in Jungian psychology. And Jung has this wonderful statement that analysis, and remember, analysis means to stir up from below. It means to bring the unconscious contents up. Analysis should release an experience that grips us or falls upon us from above as an experience that has substance and body, such as things that occurred to the ancients. And if I was to symbolize it, I would choose the Annunciation. Now, the Annunciation is where I believe it was Gabriel announces to Mary that she's to be the God carrier, or the God bearer. She's going to be the one who brings the divine child into being. We are all the divine or the God bearer, but we don't know it. So that's the part of the symbolic life. And I thought, we just start out with, looking at a little bit of, Jung has a actual chapter called the Symbolic Life. And let me see if I can find it here. Let's see. It is, let's see. I was going to try to post it here if I could find it. I don't know if this is it, but anyway, let's see. Oh no, this is it.
Say, Greg,
but this is us. Yes. Somebody say something.
Did you describe the difference between the symbolic and the creative attitude, what you're talking about?
Okay, well, the symbolic attitude is, of course, they're probably almost synonymous, but the idea of the creative and the symbolic is that symbols always participate in the synchronistic world. They are a fusion of the inner world and the outer world. So they are a fusion of the inner and the outer world. And the inner world uses man as its vehicle to incarnate in the outer world. And what Jung says, what we call individuation or becoming whole, and that means indivisible or undivided. In other words, we have a foot in both worlds. In the inner world, which is not related at all to time and space, and the outer world, which is the phenomenal world, those worlds become one, fused. Happen because you are now one aspect of yourself that's outside of time, and you are that awareness and consciousness is in you. And this is what we would talk about, probably would be the second conjunctio, is where body, spirit, and soul are all one. Now suddenly you have access to the inner world. The inner world's outside of time. So now things happen to you that aren't causally related. Now, this is the creative world. This is what they say, behold, I make all things new. That means it's the creative world. And the whole aspect of why we're here in the first place has to do with, our ontological purpose is to evolve the God image. And when you're evolving, I don't know, use a different word than the God image. It's to evolve awareness and evolve consciousness. And, there's this wonderful story of the dream of Nicodemus, okay? And it is that there was a burning tree. There was a burning tree, and it bore fruit. And whenever this fruit was harvested, it was put in the eternal warehouse. Well, this is the collective unconscious. Put over in the eternal warehouse. That's you. You're the fruit that was harvested. And your resonance changes all the fruit that comes after. Behold, I make all things new. This is the creative aspect. Now, an artist is going to tend to be in touch with that world more. They're more permeable to these images from the inner world and can express them in the outer world. And that's what they're really asking for, is these inner images are asking to be expressed in the outer world. But anyway, I wonder, this is one thing that Jeffrey Raff says. Imagine, the idea of the symbolic life is that you are, what is on the outside called what we call individuation, on the side of the inner world is the incarnation of the divine in the outer world. So in other words, your wholeness looked at from this perspective of the inner world or the divine world is that they have incarnated in a body, you, in a life, in an existence. They have incarnated in it. So that's what they're looking at. So that means that you now are this center. You're what they call a moving tabernacle. You're a moving temple in the outer world. This is the symbolic life. Now compare this to the conscious attitude. Where the only thing that's important to the ego is is victories and successes, and acquiring things, and prestige. That was what Jung said was the religion of our age, is the religion of prestige and reputation. So anyway, the conscious attitude is not what Jung is going to be talking about. So, if sometimes I just say, if unless you get that, I don't know, it is, I don't even know why you would, unless you can understand that, you're not really getting Jung. Okay. I don't know. I don't, maybe that's overly stating it, but anyway, and I please, jump in, everybody, and just tell me I'm wrong, or say, give me some nuances of what you see too.
It sounds to me like kind of what you're saying is the symbolic life is the attitude looking toward the inner world, and the creative attitude is that looking toward the outer world.
Expressing it in the outer world. Yeah, I would say it's expressing the images in the outer world. What would you say, Tim? What's your experience?
Well, this sounds very much like my experience. I'm just trying to figure out what your terminology refers to, because it does. I love the description of looking at the human life from the divine level, which gives me a new perspective. But I do feel like I'm often engaged in trying to formulate symbols out of my experience. And at the same time, I'm trying to inhabit those symbols so that I can have a better chance of becoming the embodiment of inner ideas in my outer life.
That was the word I was going to say, embodiment. Body, to embody the creative act is the way that the artist himself changes. Sometimes you can have artists who are unconscious of their art. They're incredibly permeable to the inner world, and they produce absolutely fabulous art. And yet, if you talk to them on a one-on-one basis, they're kind of dumb.
Yeah.
Now I don't know if this is absolutely true, but
oh man,
I think Bob Dylan is one of the most fabulous artists of our this past century. But if you listen to him talk, now I shouldn't say that, but I mean, just he's
that's
incredible.
painfully true.
Yeah.
So many of my artist friends, when I try to talk about this stuff, they just say, "Oh, forget about it. Just go back to work."
Well, yeah.
There's no cognitive understanding of that process.
Well, yes. So that what
they're not aware of the depth of what they can do. In a
yes.
way.
Well, they don't, what Tim was saying, they don't embody, they don't try to take the experience that they have. First of all, there's an image that comes up and they express it in the outer world in their art. Now, you can also, even if you're not an artist, I'm doing this all the time through my inner dialogues, because I'm not an artist, yet I'm doing it through my inner dialogue. I'm bringing up images. If I don't embody those images in the outer world, I've not really, it's like an unopened letter. I mean, you just, Jung says that a lot of people get, hi, Karen. You can unmute yourself at any time and start talking or whatever you want to do. We're just in the middle of talking about the difference between an artist who embodies their art and an artist who's just an artist, and a person who gets images and visions but doesn't do anything about it. And
hey, everybody.
Yes, hi. Is that Johan?
Hi, thanks. This is Johan. Yeah, thanks so much for the group. I have a quick question.
Sure.
As you were talking about the link between our inner world and outer world, I was struck by an image of sorts, that being in one of Nietzsche's books. He speaks of man being not an ultimate point, but a bridge to something greater.
Yes.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, this was his idea behind Übermensch, or the Superman, which the cartoon was eventually based on. The Nazis based a lot of the ideas behind this concept of the Superman. And I was just wondering, I know Jung was quite influenced by Nietzsche in some ways. Is what we're talking about here possibly what Nietzsche was on about with regards to that man being a bridge to something greater? Was he talking about a bridge between these two concepts? Am I reaching a bit? Or
well, do you remember the rope walker in Zarathustra?
Yeah.
That was where he mentioned the bridge walker, the rope walker. This is the person who bridges the inner world and the outer world,
Right.
And what I would say, first of all, Jung really was influenced by Nietzsche, probably more by Goethe, but he thought that the problem with Nietzsche was that he did not embody his images, like Tim was saying. I mean, Nietzsche was this incredible fountain of absolutely stunning statements from the unconscious. I mean, you read them and you're just, wow, this is incredible. Yet he could not express them in the outer, or embody them and make, in other words, he was just this fountain of these incredible images and things, but he couldn't take that and make himself a moving temple in the outer world. Someone who embodied what he did, and in other words, he would become a true vehicle. Both, Jung took this stance of Prometheus. I will always be a man with my feet on the ground. I'm not going to kowtow or bow down to Zeus, So, I mean, in other words, he would take the images from the unconscious, but he would very stubbornly and strongly say, I'm first of all a human being with my feet on the ground. And this is really a big principle of alchemy that I think Nietzsche missed, is, its strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. In other words, you can't have this visionary, you can't live in this visionary world. And Tim, what do you think about that? If you live in the visionary world, you haven't embodied it, you don't have your feet on the ground. Its strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. Christ is too aerial for he leaves, Jung said, a hole in the human heart because he's too spiritual. You know,
well, it's a little bit, again, speaking symbolically, it reminds me of a plug. If you've got 2 points, positive and negative, if it's not earthed and there's something happens, it can short circuit the entire board. But if it's earthed, it's grounded, it provides, I don't know, it makes sense to me, but that image sort of comes to mind here.
Yes, and that is another aspect of the human being. Okay. And
you also mentioned
embodying.
Ariel. It makes me think about the Shakespeare play, The Tempest, where Prospero is this magician on an island, and he has control of all of these natural forces, all these spirits. And it's not until his enemies are shipwrecked on his shore that he's able to carry out in the outer world the kinds of powers he has control of on the inner world.
Mm-hmm.
And what the play is about is how he reconciles the fact that he has this great amount of power that he could use to destroy his enemies. And instead of doing that, he thinks about how he's going to transform the world for the sake of his daughter and her happiness, to incorporate his enemies and return all of the characters into civilization, to be delivered from this island. And that, to me, is an embodiment of exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, I'm going to quick mute everybody, but unmute yourself if you want to. We're just getting a little bit of feedback. But Tim, what I would say is this: is that you're and what Johan said too, is that if you don't ground the signal, it is there is a potential of overload, and this is really what is the midpoint between the two worlds. We are the midpoint between the worlds, not our ego, but what they call the stone, the philosophical stone. This is what the stone cannot be created by nature. That's what the alchemists say over and over again. It can't be created by nature. It can't be created by the ego. It can't be created by either pole, okay? And yet it's a stone. It's heavy. It's earth. It's grounded. The only way that the stone can be created, and this is what unites the uppermost and the nethermost in what's called the midmost, is the stone, okay? And this is this is grounding or embodying the image. And this is where you can have your foot. You can be Nietzsche, but you can be not nuts or not crazy or anything. He did have some medical problems too, so we have to have some. We shouldn't throw him under the bus too much, but I mean, compared with anyway, the idea there is we're talking about to get back on the original point is the difference between the symbolic and the creative. I think the difference between the artist and me, is the artist is a vehicle of the expression of the images of the inner world in the outer world, and that's their gift. Okay, I don't have that gift. Yet I have the same access to those images that the artist does. So what do I do with them? I create the symbolic life. I'm going to now all of this to and the reason I thought it would be instructive to talk about the symbolic life versus the conscious attitude is that this is really Jungian psychology, and you can't go very far forward in Jungian psychology, which shouldn't be called Jungian psychology. It's an ancient wisdom of listening to the inner voice, and but this is what Jung is, and the reason he liked alchemy so much is because it embodies, it returns, its strength is perfected when it returns to earth. It's totally real about the real life of that person in this world, and through somehow, you know, being able to see reality that consists of an inner world and an outer world, and not go crazy when you do it, and also to maintain your Promethean stance that you are a fully strong human ego in the outer world, and yet you want to be linked, and you're going to have a family, and you're going to have children, and you're going to participate fully in the outer world, and yet you're going to be connected with the inner world. Now, there's a very interesting, Marie-Louise von Franz talks about this, which is, I think, is really, is sort of a stunner, is she brings up the image of, before I studied Zen, mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers, you know, and then after I started to work on enlightenment, I found out that mountains weren't mountains and rivers weren't rivers. Okay, you've recognized the symbolic images in the events of your life. Now, you've recognized that they're, you know, that they, what Goethe said, that everything that is temporary is but a metaphor. Now, this, if you really realize this, then you have really achieved full ego consciousness, because now you can look at yourself disengaged. Okay, so if you can recognize everything that is temporary is but a metaphor, everything that happens to me is a metaphor. Everything I'm going to look at it as, what does this mean? What does this teach me? You know, and you know, it's funny, Nietzsche replied to that. They were almost contemporaries. He said, everything that is eternal is but a metaphor. You know, kind of a stab at Goethe. But okay, so when I started studying enlightenment, I found out that mountains weren't mountains and rivers weren't rivers. So now I'm being able to see what Goethe says, everything is but a metaphor. Now I've got access to the inner world. I realize that these images, everything that happens to me, I mean, this is what Kant talks about. What is consciousness? I mean, everything we do is a metaphor. I mean, if you know, does a cow think your paintings are beautiful or your sculptures are beautiful, Tim? I mean, no, he doesn't. Cow doesn't. Is it? Can I eat it? You know, I mean, that's what it's probably thinking. But anyway, so everything that's temporary is an image or a metaphor, and you know, consciousness is really all images. And you know, God speaks only mythologically. God speaks only in images, and the inner world is a realm of images, and the next world is a realm of images, according to Jung too. I mean, the world that we would enter after death, if there is a world. But anyway, so now we get to the point where I've achieved Satori. Okay. And when I achieved Satori, in other words, I'm not looking for enlightenment anymore, I found out that mountains were mountains and rivers were rivers. Okay. This is the symbolic life. Okay. You know, you first of all, you recognize that everything is an image, a metaphorical. I mean, our humans are what's called Homo mythicus, not Homo sapiens. In other words, Homo sapiens is thinking man. Homo mythicus is myth making or image meaning making man. You know, I mean, that's what is a much less thin description of what our purpose in the universe is. is that we're here to provide meaning. Okay. So when mountains are now back to being mountains and rivers are back to being rivers, the strength is perfected when it returns to the earth. This would be Nietzsche if he had understood and integrated the voice of the unconscious that he was the conduit for into a balanced life. I mean, that would have been the symbolic life. No one would, we would never achieve that on the level that Nietzsche did. I mean, but we still have access to those sources. So anyway, I guess the point is, and Mara, I was thinking we could just read a couple paragraphs if people want to on the symbolic life, and there's another part of it that I'd really like to look at too eventually. I mean, I think this might take a couple sessions, but it is to look at also the let me see, this is it here, right here. I think this is it there. Okay. Okay. Yeah.
What about what about the rock? You said the nature doesn't make the rock, and then then something else?
Yeah. Well, okay. Nature doesn't produce the rock or the stone, the midmost point. I mean, nature is really is the source of the outer world, but it's also the inner world, and as far as the outer world is as we're concerned, the ego is there's nothing like it on earth. I mean, this ego, this disassociated point, which is not in this participation mystique with nature, say like the herds in Africa or the buffalo herd. I mean, we're someone who steps back and says, I can see myself, but that's we can look at ourselves. So this is the vehicle of the imaginal world, is us, and then the inner world together. What you do is you listen to the voice of the inner world. You create an image through drawing or through automatic writing, and then embody it somehow. And if you just do what Nietzsche did, you're never, I mean, take all your internal writings and make them into a book and then walk off. Or, I think Bob Dylan does that. And Tim, you could tell us about people that do that too. No, you have to make this in a way of living. In other words, you're informed by it. I'm doing this all the time in my dreams, that I'm trying to go, and I can show you a few examples. But anyway, the stone is the midmost point, and the man and spirit are the uppermost point, and the collective unconscious is the nethermost or the lowest point. Or this is the depths.
Okay.
So the depths and the spirit world and the ego world are united in the stone, which is the midmost point. Now they can exist together. And Johann, this is where your two poles, see the two poles, you can't have ego awareness unless you have an energy flow. So you need a positive and a negative, or some type of opposites. Otherwise, nothing happens. See, in oneness, nothing ever happens. So you need two poles to have this energy flow. You can't unite the opposites. If you unite the opposites, they're obliterated like in a black hole. I mean, they're gone and nothing happens then. So how do you unite the opposites? In the midmost point, in a symbolic point, which is not all spirit, not all body, but it's a combination of body, spirit, and soul. And here, the images from the inner world and our ego consciousness from the outer world can create meaning together. And this is,
I-
behold, I create all things new. Yes?
Sorry, I seem to recall somewhere Jung, possibly, correct me if I'm wrong, pointing out that we almost need to create a tension between opposites if it doesn't exist. And the greater the tension, the greater the propensity for the desired outcome that we're looking to reach. Is that?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, one is not a number. Two is a number. You don't start having numbers till you have two. So, in other words, this is what really creates the universe, is this tension of opposites. Without a tension of opposites, there is no ego, there is no awareness, there is nothing ever happened. You know, this is what he calls that we light a small candle in the darkness of mere being. You know, I mean, this is the tension of opposites.
Again, I'm drawn back to the image of that you brought up earlier in Zarathustra of the tightrope and the walker over the tightrope. Is almost like that tightrope is a rope between two opposites, and if it's not tight enough, we can't walk it because it's too lax and we'll fall off.
Yes, you need that tension. If the tension is weak and the rope is flaccid, there's no walking on it. You know, man is the one who walks across the bridge, he's the tightrope walker, you know, and in Nietzsche's case, he fell off, you know, and his soul died, or what they said, his soul died before his body. You know, I mean, this is kind of described Nietzsche.
It makes sense to me. I've been trying to Google a reference I can't find now, unfortunately, but Jung somewhere references Nietzsche, and I think the archetype of the old man, and that it's an impossible burden to carry or some such, to be that wise, so to speak, without integrating any of it. We just topple over, and he uses Nietzsche as a good example of such a person who, as you've pointed out, if one doesn't integrate it, we become almost physically sick, as Nietzsche did. It's an impossible burden to carry, in a sense, that wise, without integrating any of it.
Yeah, and it tends to be an inflation too. If you identify with the images of the unconscious and say, I produce this, that's who I am. I mean, you're really calling yourself a god, you know, and this is what inflation is, you know, and inflation is, of course, inflation is a balloon that's blown up. And what's going to happen to a balloon that gets too big? It's going to pop, you know, and that's depression. And
I think about in terms of the opposites, I think about a conversation that I've been having over years and years with people talking about feminism. And there's a tendency to minimize the differences between male and female by saying, for instance, oh, all women have high voices. Well, some women don't have high voices, so we can't say that. So it's kind of a mechanism of disallowing all the differences between men and women. And the danger with that is they end up becoming too much the same.
well, yeah, I mean, and this is a good example, I think a very good example of the difference between the conscious attitude and the symbolic life. Okay. There are real men and there are real women, and they tend to biologically have different, slightly nuanced directions in which they go. I mean, if you look at a statistical breakdown of the psychological types, you know, women tend to be more of feeling function. And of course, they're the vehicle of eros. So they tend to be more related than men, who are these air beings. Now, this is, I don't want to go, I want to make sure that we're taught, we differentiate, not just between the conscious man and the conscious woman, the real one that we meet in the outer world, and what the symbolism of the active male principle and the brooding and incubating principle of the feminine. You know, I mean, there's a difference between those in the
Well,
inner world, and you need those differences in the inner world because, as Johann says, you're not going to have an energy flow, and you want there to be a tension of opposites. But we don't want to apply all of that to real people in the.
right. Yeah, I think it's helpful to make as many of those distinctions as we can and to separate them as much as we can so that we can have a dialogue about these things.
Exactly. And that's what,
without the separation, there is no dialogue.
well, yes. Okay. And you know, the principle of alchemy is dissolve and coagulate. And that means it's called the spagyric science, and it means to separate and to gather. So you take things and you differentiate them, and you apply all kinds of synonyms to them. You in your art, you put various nuances that really brings out the image in its full glory. Okay, that's the object of differentiation. You know, is to fully flesh out the differentiation between this and the differentiation between that, because they complement each other, you know, and then they can have a dance. You know, now you've not only have this thing that is fully fleshed out, which is different from this thing, but now they can interact with their fully differentiated aspects. So that's important. The one thing I think that is, and you know this, Tim, is you don't want to get bogged down in I don't really, you know, in the political correctness side of it, I just get slammed all the time by this, and this is not what we want to talk about. I mean, it's a waste of energy because we're really not that's what I'm saying is the conscious attitude, which really what I'd like to talk about for a few sessions and get examples of, is the difference between living with the realm of images, at least being informed by them. You can still fully participate, and you will still fully participate in the outer world, or you're not going to be a balanced person. But keep in mind that the symbolic life needs that tension of opposites that Johann was talking about. With the flaccid rope, nobody's going to be able to cross the bridge from one world to the other. So it's very important that each pole fully expresses itself and has is totally free to do it. But anyway, I guess why don't we just does somebody want to read the first paragraph and we can just discuss it? It's I just thought we'd read a couple paragraphs from this. This is called The Symbolic Life, and it's in volume 18. I can read the first one if you want.
That's fine. No, I didn't know. So where are you? 625?
Yeah, start with 625 if you would, Nicholas.
All right. You see, man is in need of a symbolic life, badly in need. We only live banal, ordinary, rational, or irrational things, which are naturally also within the scope of rationalism. Otherwise, you could not call them rational. But we have no symbolic life. Where do we live symbolically? Nowhere, except where we participate in the ritual of life. But who, among the many, are really participating in the ritual of life? Very few. And when you look at the ritual life of the Protestant Church, it is almost nil. Even the Holy Communion has been rationalized. I say that from the Swiss point of view, and the Swiss Zwinglingen Church of the Holy Communion is not a communion at all. It is a meal of memory. There is no mass either. There is no confession. There is no ritual. Symbolic life.
Now, does anybody get a little tingly when they read that?
Yes.
Well, I mean, I do. I always think I'm nuts, you know. I mean, because that makes me tingly.
So I'm come from a very deeply Protestant family. In fact, my brother is the 6th generation Methodist minister on both branches of my family. And so I'm very much rooted in the Protestant tradition. And yet this is exactly how I feel about the Protestant church. Mm-hmm. So for instance, when I go to Europe, I become a Catholic because I really love the ritual of the Mass and being able to participate in that. But because I can't understand the language, I'm able to participate in it with my soul rather than with my brain. So I can't object to the dogma that I hear.
Well, yeah, I mean, the idea of having it in Latin, you know, is that it becomes a incantation. You know, it is an introduction into the divine world. You know, I mean, it's you know, sort of a ritual of entrance. It's a ritual of departure or entrance into the and in this is one thing talking about the symbolic life is we have in this day and age, all ages before ours in the hunter-gatherer world or everything had rituals of initiation where they were symbolically accepted into not just the society of the outer world, but into the divine world of the group that they belong to. You know, so there was this ritual of initiation like you would get in confirmation in Catholic Church. In fact, in the Catholic Church, they give you another name. You know, I mean, you take another name, and this is I think the symbolism of that is that what do they say about the banal, ordinary? Where do we live symbolically? Nowhere, except where we participate in the ritual of life. But who among the many are really participating in this ritual of life? Very few. You know, the banal, ordinary, rational world is where we really live. You know, and so I guess that's the whole crux of the matter, is that this is a wonderful adventure. And actually, I think the thing about it well, I just tell you my own example is, you know, I've been, since I stopped analysis maybe about a year ago, I've been doing active imaginations every day. And, you know, I'm not a very imaginal being. I talked about the ones with the ropes, the ladders, and the wings. I'm probably a rope ladder type person. You know, I have to do a lot of climbing, you know, with my hands because I can't fly up to this image. But I'm really, I knew when I was doing analysis that when I talked about, I mean, the first half of an analysis usually is you're talking about, oh, how do you feel this week? Blah, blah, blah. You know, I mean, it is sometimes healthy to talk about something and you know, you need to talk with someone. Jung said, if you can't talk to an analyst, talk to your stove, you know, tell your stove your problems. You know, I mean, this is a wonderful part of the Catholic Church too, the confessional. You know, you don't really need a priest in the other box. You just need to become conscious of what you do and of your compulsive behavior. So anyway, you know,
And be able to articulate it.
Pardon me?
Yeah. And be able to articulate what you're feeling.
Yes, and get it out. Actually, when you get it out, see, you create distance. So now you're not stewing in your own soup so much. You put it out there. So now it's out there and I'm in here. So I create a little bit of distance for myself. So now I'm not the stew. I'm more the chef with the spoon, you know. So that's the idea of the confessional, I think. Plus the fact that you're not, it can tend to create a remorse if you've done something wrong and give you some perspective, you know, whatever. But it is a ritual. It's really a ritual. So it's initiation, all these rituals that we don't have anymore. So now we got to create them ourselves. You know, this is the ritual of life he's talking about. But So anyway, I started doing these active imaginations, and I was saying in my dreams, when I would try to amplify them, give them synonyms. So I'm doing what Tim does in his art. I'm taking my dreams and I'm trying to amplify them, and amplify. Imagine, remember, comes from the root to magnify, to expand consciousness. So the dream writer, the nocturnal dream writer, has sent you a message from the central world, and it's only for you. This is message only for you. This is what I'm thinking too about this ritual of life. Now that we don't have any rituals, it's only our images that are helped. Nobody else's images are going to help you. So you have to do this. This is what's going to create your ritualized existence, but anyway, I just started doing this active imagination, and I really got some of this tingly feeling when I did it with the analyst. Nothing like doing it with an inner figure, and I tried to be very respectful to inner figures, but just like this week, I always, and I don't think I chose these figures. I think the soul, who's the mediator and the party arranger, I think she's the party arranger. She created the inner figures for me, and one is the deep feminine, and that would be Sophia, who's the wisdom of the earth, and then the other one is Persephone, who's the goddess of death. I need to become very conscious of her. I need to realize that this existence, there's in this, when what were Christ's last words, "It is finished." You need to embody somewhat the "it is finished" in this life, and realize that you're mortal. So I think that's the aspect of that. And then Inanna, who takes me down the 7 steps. I always go through and we take our clothes, remove our persona and go, so we are in the divine world without a persona. But I also, in include Anima Mercurius, who's, she's both Hermes and your soul, and Hermes is the earth god. He's not Christ, he's the earth god. He unites the upper and the lower. Anyway, I'll mention Hermes himself, and I say, I say this, and I try to embody it. I say, every line I say, if I didn't say it consciously enough and didn't embody it consciously enough, I'll repeat it. But I say, "Come to me, Lord Hermes. I am thou, and thou art I." And I say each parts of those 3 very with as much being there as I can. Well, this one time, I just this week, I said, "Thou art I." I blacked out, and I suddenly saw an ocean, and on the ocean I saw forms coming out of it, and it said, and then a voice said, "All things come into being." This is how all things come into being. When you say, "Thou art I." Now, this is part of that, I just was recalling this because of, what Tim was saying about listening to the Catholic Mass. And you do this in Europe, Tim? Is in Europe?
Well, yes, I've traveled around, but every time I find myself in a country with a different language that I can't understand, I find myself drawn to these rituals like the Mass, and the Mass is really the only thing I'm talking about. But if I was in a indigenous culture, for instance, I'd be drawn to their spiritual rituals for the same reason, because they are trafficking in the symbolic, and I just feel hungry for that in our culture.
Oh, that's what I say. There's just this thirst for it, because they're participating in a divine world. You know, if there's anything living in their symbolic life of their group, they're participating in a world which to us is what T.S. Eliot called the wasteland. You know, it's the world of dry stones. You know, that's all we got. You know, we don't have any. Johan, do you live in Europe, right? I mean, you probably got a little more roots than we Americans do. You know, Americans tend to be a little rootless. Europeans, if they didn't get displaced by the 30 Years' War and everything else, and every other war.
I'm from Cape Town, South Africa.
Oh, from Cape Town, South Africa. Okay. All right. Well, anyway, do you find that there's much continuing tradition of the indigenous peoples in South Africa that you've witnessed at all?
We have 11 different official languages per se, and we have a lot of different cultures here. It's easy to overlook them if one just gets caught up in everyday life, but we have such a rich and diverse set of cultures in this country with long histories, and it's very rich for if one looks for it and actually researches it. But if one just looks on the surface, and gets caught up in day-to-day life, one will miss it. But there's a lot to be said for the cultural history that we have in this country and the diversity of it.
Yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating place. I've really always. There was some movie about South Africa a little while ago that I really loved. But anyway, it's that we have such a barren existence, yet we can create the richness and the water of life. I mean, Jung is mentioning that, in his Symbolic Life, as we go through it. I mean, if you want to, maybe we could quick read this second paragraph. Mara, do you have anything to say, or Charles? What is your input on this? Do you have anything? You don't have to, but I just wondered if you did, because we want everybody to get their chance. Oh, wait a second. I lost my group. Okay, let's see here. Well, anyway, I lost my group here, but let me go back to the, maybe I can just read it real quick, and then we can, if you guys want to say anything else, fine, but we can, I'd like to just continue. And the one thing I would like to read later, and I think you're probably aware of this, Tim, is the aspect of if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth. That's from Mysterium Conjunctionis, and it is, is a real kick you in the butt type of a statement from Jung on what happens when you don't devote some time every day of your life to your soul, and the injury that you do to yourself by not doing that, by not every day devoting a certain time to your soul. But anyway, that is going to be something that I thought we'd discuss, because it's very much related to the inner life. And the only reason I'm focusing on this is because I'm just thinking that unless you can't even start on Jungian psychology until you understand what he's doing, which is basically he's trying to relate to the he's trying to go down to the house of wisdom, which is built on the rock, which is where you can't go any lower. And then you build it, your stones, your wisdom there. Now, this is not anything to do with the outer world or exploiting the outer world or getting rich or marrying well or having children or having a nice house. this is relating to the God within you, the self within you. And this is a daily ritual where you can recapture and rediscover the what you saw in the Catholic Mass. Jung says he loves the Catholic Mass, but he can't intellectually participate in it anymore because it's just not who he is. But we can just read one quick more paragraph. And
actually, sorry, Charles, his microphone's not working. He said he wanted to talk about the lack of conscious attitude as opposed to lack of living symbolically.
Okay.
Because that is just a more
The
popular
lack of
concern.
conscious attitude. Well, I don't know. I mean, the thing I'm thinking, it's just my hypothesis, is that we think that Jungian psychology is about the conscious attitude when it really isn't. I just wanted to show you this thing real quick here, but says, how can we in our day have the idea of Christ in ourselves, yet have to make a living as a bookkeeper, to meet Miss Meyer and marry her and have children, be obliged to live with them? Imagine an evening at the corner tavern as Mr. So-and-so, a glass of beer in front of him, and in his heart, the outrageous claim, I am the Son of God. I mean, this is the symbolic life, But now, can you read that once more, Nicholas? Because I don't think I got it. Or what Charles said.
I got you. My phone's about to die, so if I cut out,
Okay,
you know why.
I'm sorry.
Oh, he left.
Okay, all right.
I can't find his question.
That's fine. All right. Well, anyway, I will read it.
I got it, actually.
Okay.
I found it. Sorry. Or whoever wants to read it, it's up to them.
Okay. Yeah. Well, go ahead and read it again. It's what Charles said. He's back now.
He wanted to talk about the lack of. Okay. He wanted to talk about the lack of conscious attitude as opposed to lack of living symbolic. That's all he really said.
Okay. Well, it's just my hypothesis, and I thought the reason we'd start with this is what I see is there's no lack of conscious attitude. What do you guys think? I mean, I think the ego attitude. I mean, this is supposed to be the what happened in the second half of Pisces. The first half was vertical, spirit and man. The second half was the age of the Antichrist, which means the anti-self. This is the age of the ego, the age of the conscious attitude.
And can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, Charles.
Okay, I'm sorry. I had my a different microphone set. Yeah, I guess. What would you think about someone that is, I don't know, too much in the water, so to speak, and that has a very kind of weak ego consciousness? I guess my perspective is been struggling with the poor eternus archetype for a long time, and just a very weak conscious attitude. Mm-hmm. And read a Edinger book one time, wherein the part talking about coagulation, that there is a lot of guilt that causes people to not manifest and not coagulate. They're like unborn souls in heaven. And I have an extremely strong imagination and can kind of just spontaneously access symbolic images, but in physical ego consciousness life can manifest very little, and always kind of want to run back to my more imaginative life.
Well, that's the puer eternus for sure. I mean, I am a puer eternus. I'm a recovering puer eternus. A puer eternus lives tangential to life. Here's life. It's a circle. They only intersected at one point. Now, that was me for the first part of my life. And you mentioned Edinger and the coagulation. Well, coagulation means to bring the puer down to earth. You know, I mean, how do you ground yourself? I mean, the only way you can really ground yourself, I think, is to listen to your dreams. Most of my dreams as a puer eternus was that I was, you know, doing things, floating in my dreams. I never had my feet on the ground. And I also, you know, see, the puer is living in a protected sphere. This is in the book of Peter Pan. It's the land where people never grow up. It means eternal child, and that's what I am. I'm an eternal child, and I think you guys will find evidence to convict me in court for this as well as I go forward. And anyway, so the idea is I'm floating, you know, I don't need to walk anywhere. I don't even need my feet. You know, I had dreams where I was up in outer space and they said, well, let's just remove his feet and put him over here. He doesn't need them anyway, you know, up here in the weightless realms, you know. And my father comes from, so this caused me a lot of problems as a young man, you know. I mean, and not only that, I was an introvert too. So, and I didn't know what introvert meant then. I was just very awkward socially. So, you know, I thought I was crazy, you know. So I'm an introvert. That's, I think, Charles, if you have a lot of access to the inner world, you probably tend to gain your energy from the inner world. An introvert loses energy when they're in the outer world. If I'm out in a party, boy, I get fatigued so fast that I have to leave, you know. And in other words, I get very tired, and I have to go back to the well of the inner world. So that's what. How old are you, Charles? Are you?
I'm 29, but I look like I'm 50.
Okay. Well, I would say that I overcame my prayer, Eternus, when I was about 50, maybe 45. You know. Anyway, you know, it tends that a puer never really participates in history. Why should I? I'm having so much fun in my inner world. I don't need this. Okay, but you do.
I'm not sure if this is what David Bowie was singing about exactly, but his song Ground Control to Major Tom comes to mind here. And even if not directly
Yes.
what he was thinking about, it makes sense to me with regards to what Charles was saying, being an introvert myself.
Yes, this is what my father comes from Norway. You know, I told this story. I went to Norway one time when I was maybe in my early 20s, and my grandfather's first cousin there was in her late 80s at the time, and she looks at me, and I could speak a little Norwegian, and she says, "Craig, you're up in the clouds. You're totally up in the clouds. My feet are on the ground. I walk one step at a time, and I feel and smell the earth when I walk." She says, "When you get back to America, I want you to find the first girl you see and marry her. You know, ground yourself." You know, I mean, I just had this whole. I'm going to get rid of this thing real quick. I just wanted to get rid of this. There we go. That I needed to ground myself. Well, how do you ground yourself? Again, I would say the way that you ground yourself is to write your dreams down, then do an active imagination on them, and ask some inner figure, what do these things mean? And I want to show you one quick picture of that I drew. I'm no Tim, but I just did have a little picture here one time. See if I can find it real quick of, let me see if I can find it. With just the death of the puer in me. Okay, here it is. Okay. There. I found this being, a dead person floating in the air. You know, it was my puer eternus aspect. You know, I mean, it was this floating being who lives tangentially to life. So I would say, Charles, as far as is the conscious attitude versus the imaginal life, your imaginal life can be a healing aspect as well. You can't get lost in it. See, there's a difference between fantasy, which is what I tended to participate in as a puer, and the imaginal world, the world of bringing what Tim does. He takes these images from the inner world, makes them manifest in the outer world. That's not fantasy. You know, he's made concrete and real an image that he got from the inner world. I don't know if that's how you would describe it, Tim. I think that there's a lot more craft in what you do than
But exactly, yeah.
describing. Yeah. But anyway, then you need to be not like Bob Dylan. You need to take that embodied image that you made concrete and real in the outer world, manifest. See, this is the whole idea of Jungian psychology, is we have the access to deep wisdom in our lives. And yet it is totally latent. It is only potential, because we are living in the conscious attitude, or we're living in the fantasy world. You know, it could be either one. We're living in a fantasy world either way, you know, in the fantasy world of going out and getting drunk every night, and, you know, gambling and all this. That's a fantasy world too, as well as just living in an inner world is a fantasy world. But what you need to do is to do a meditation to quiet your ego. Then you take the images of your dream. I think this is the only way you can do it to begin with, because these are real. This is the Marie-Louise von Franz says, this is the most genuine thing about us, are these images of dream. So now here's the most genuine thing about you, and it is telling you what's wrong with you in a weird language that you don't understand, you know. But then you take and you write down every line of the dream. I mean, and try to break it down into parts or segments. Then after you've done this meditation, quieting the ego, and I try to make it a real ritualized thing. I don't just do it, you know, like I'm John Paul Sartre. You know, I try to do it with a little bit of devotional aspect, just a little bit, you know. Then I will ask an inner figure. And I chose Sophia because I told my wife I want to talk to the boss. What does this mean that there is this dead figure floating around in my room? She'll tell you. Write it down. You know, I mean, and then okay, you've done that, and then maybe draw a picture of it. Now this is coagulating. This is coming down to the earth. So you're taking these images and now you're making them concrete and real, like Tim does with his art. Tim is a wonderful, go to Tim Holmes' studio and look at some of Tim's art. But anyway, you make it concrete and real in the outer world. The images are longing for the light. They are long. Now you're starting to make this latent potential awareness, the informing wisdom of nature within you, more conscious, because you're lending it ego consciousness. When you do this act of imagination, you are lending your ego consciousness, your voice, to Sophia, and now she has a voice and she can tell you what these dream images mean. And every time you do this, you're adding a stone to the house of wisdom that's built on the rock where you can't go any lower. So every time you're doing this, you're adding a stone. So next time you go talk to Sophia, she's more real. She's more alive in you. And as you do this over and over again, they're going to these aspects of you are going to become more and more they're going to become actual someone that you can talk to. Now, this is the symbolic
So,
life.
Craig?
Once, yes, go ahead.
So, thing, you're talking about this, and I'm thinking about my own process. And one of the things that is kind of my private understanding of what separates art from just thinking about things is the participation of another person. So, for instance, I have a drawing here that for me is just journaling. As long as I am just participating in my own process, that's fantasy. It's not until I make the drawing available to somebody, as soon as another human being sees it, then that turns it into art.
Yes. That's
So,
what mythos means, is to communicate. Mythos means to communicate.
So one of the things that I think is really important is determining that each of us as a creative human being has the capacity to participate in our fantasy life and to write poetry or to journal or to dance or whatever it is. But as soon as we share that with another person, the experience, the shared experience, is what becomes art.
Yeah, and that other person can act as a sounding board. I mean, because you need this feedback. So you've taken the image from the inner world, you created it in the outer world, then you move it out and you get feedback from others, and this makes it more real. But the art aspect.
Well, it's not just right. It's not only the feedback, it's the reality of the image, because the image, as far as I'm concerned, I have thousands of drawings that nobody has seen, and all of that stuff is kind of like, it's non-existent. It doesn't have
life.
It doesn't have any life, right? And as soon as another pair of eyes hits this image, and that image is infused inside them somehow, then we have what is really a living image, because it has the capacity to enter into the outer world.
Well, and you'll find this addressed directly by Jung in a couple of paragraphs when we read later, is that these images that you found, the icons that were once in the symbolic place, the paintings that were done by the masters of these images that were in the sacred temenos, they're now in an art gallery, and there's nothing wrong with that. But he says that there's a difference between, he thinks that that's a travesty, but to take them out of the sacred, because they were sacred images. Your images, Tim, are sacred, and they need a sacred spot. But I do, that is absolutely, the only, see, that's my problem. Numinous means that the image, that there's an unknown, and it's called there's the tritium quid, is that third what that combines two knowns. That's what a work of art is. It's this third thing that brings together a tension of opposites. Okay, it's automatically has a unknown quality, a synchronistic quality that's not related to the banal, ordinary world. So it is numinous. So that's what numinous means. It's unknown. Numinous means the other beckons. Okay, the other says, "I'm here. I can speak to you." And Jung. So to me, since I'm not an artist, I can't show mine to anyone. But so I'm not an artist, I guess is what you're saying, Tim. My art is more numinous. I mean, I'd be So see, that isn't that funny that there's I'm just saying I'm not sure if I would want to show too many of my images to the outer world. Not that there's anything wrong with them, but they're so intimate, where the art aspect is more of a that you are serving the outer world somehow, that you're a hail world so rich in joy, I will always be your servant through love of you. In other words, there's something that you're doing as a creator of civilization, a creator of the like Eliot and William Butler Yeats and people like that. I mean, they are really the ones who are pushing the envelope into the next decade or the next 100 years. Look at and I always say that look at the difference between the 50s and the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 10s or whatever. They all have a different flavor. Well, where did they get the flavor? They got the flavor from those people who were producing art, music, poetry, literature at that time. Not from the politics. They were getting it from the purveyors of that Tao of that decade. So that's, I think, the difference. That's what an artist is, I think. I'm just ruminating here.
Well, I would include all of us in that, that collection, because we all have the capacity to contribute to that evolution.
Yes.
And the tendency when you have an idea or a dream or a thought or something is to keep it to yourself because, well, sometimes it's private, but sometimes you just think, oh, it's silly. Mm-hmm. But when you are able to muster up the courage to say, okay, here's my dream, or to somehow share your thought with somebody else, then it becomes part of the collective. And it's not until you seize that courage to say, yes, I too am a human being and I have something to share, that your soul is exposed into the world.
Mm-hmm. And say the one thing you also have that as an artist is a vocation, a calling, and you're saying to hell with all of you in the 9 to 5 world. I'm doing this come hell or high water. So you throw your whole being into it, and that's how you shape culture. That's how you resonate. Now, see, that resonance has a much more ringing resonance than one who just sits there and writes their dreams and does active imagination and then goes and be an accountant all week, which is what I do, my day job. But anyway, I think we went about an hour. What I'd like to do next time at 10 a.m. next Saturday is we'll start with paragraph 626 in Symbolic Life. And this is what I'd really love to do, is just have this open conversations and just do a few about the symbolic life. And then we'll do a little bit on if thou wouldst moisten this dry earth, because the whole aspect of this, I think, is that I find, and Charles, I'm very cognizant of what you're saying, because me and you are brothers, because I went through what you're probably experiencing right now, is though that the symbolic life again is building the house of wisdom on the rock, with each stone from that you bring up from the inner world, and it you want to fully participate in the outer world, but this makes life much richer. And we who live in the desert of the wasteland that T.S. Eliot has outlined for us in this desiccated age, need this water of life, this fountain, and we don't have it. And that's what Jung said at the beginning. Well, anyway, why don't we reconvene at 10 a.m. next Saturday?
Sorry,
Okay.
just quickly,
Yeah.
is there a specific reference for if thou wouldst moisten the dry
Yes,
earth?
I will.
Is there an author or?
No, that is actually by someone called Phalathia, well, that means the lover of truth, and it's in Mysterium Conjunctionis. And let me quick get it. He calls it an alchemical allegory, but it is the most kick-ass thing you've ever read.
Could you spell the author, please?
Well, actually, this is from Mysterium Conjunctionis. It's Jung is the author.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, it starts paragraph 189 in Mysterium Conjunctionis, and I guarantee you, Johann, if you read this, actually, you want to probably start in paragraph 190. Paragraph 189 is a little.
I'm gonna look it up. You were asking earlier about cultures in South Africa, and a friend of mine went off on a how would one describe it? A trip up into the one of the deserts we have here. He partook in a healing ceremony of sorts, and one of the aspects of this healing ceremony, be it serendipitously or intentionally, was at some point a woman began to cry very deeply, and the purpose was that the tears would moisten the very dry the riverbed, which had run dry. So I'm just picking up on a synchronicity here that is quite interesting for me. So I'm definitely going to go look that one up a bit more. Thanks for sharing it.
Tears are so cathartic, you know. I mean, whenever you have tears, you have melted what is hard. You've softened what is hard. So that's the purpose of tears, is to soften what is hard. And this is why, you know, the women tend to be a little more prone to that emotional cathartic moment, because they are the beings who make what is hard soft, because they are moon people, and they are trying to they're trying to blur the harshness of the solar world into a more cool and you know, more accepting and related attitude. But anyway, well, that's beautiful, Johann. I mean, what a way to end up the group. And it's so beautiful to hear that. I mean, this is what I think is beautiful about forming a group, is to hear everybody, and you don't have to speak up either, but I think that's what really adds to the color and flavor of a discussion and dialogue. So anyway, 10 a.m.
Craig, is there a way to find the Symbolic Life online, or the parts that we're
I tell you what I'll do. I'm going to put a link to a PDF for it. It's volume 18 of the collected works. And I will put a link to it, and I'll email it. I'll email you a PDF of it.
Okay.
Because I have your email address. But I will, I'll just also put a link to the PDF, but it's volume 18. It's got a lot of different things in it, but the Symbolic Life, that was what my analyst told me to read when I first came on, because it's kind of a good introduction to a psychology that's not so much, that is interested in awakening the divine within us, and so that we, you know, live in a synchronistic world where we have both the timeless aspect in us alive, living. And that's when you start to experience crazy things, you know, I mean, things that are startling. You know, an ocean comes up and it says, all things, through this, all things come into being, but whatever. I'll send it out. I'll put a link, and it will start out with paragraph 626 next time. And if thou wouldst moisten this dry air starts at paragraph 189 in Mysterium Conjunctionis. I mean, I would like to go through that. They're both very short, but I think it's a great introduction to living in the synchronistic world, and that's what our aim is. So anyway, well, I'll see you guys all next week at 10 a.m. and thank you so much. We'll see you all next time. Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mara.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Charles and Johan.